This is Techno, a show about innovations that can change lives.
The science of fighting a wildfire.
We're going to explore the intersection of hardware and humanity, and we're doing it in a unique way. This is a show about science by scientists. Tonight, Techno journeys into the jungle.
This is one of the iconic animals of Costa Rica. Literally, you see postcards with this thing.
One of the most beautiful and fragile places on the planet is under attack.
So deforestation has declined, but it's still happening.
How extensive is the damage? We are going to find out.
That's why we're gonna be walking every trail, stream, or swamp we come across to see what's out there.
I'm Phil Torres. I'm an entomologist.
Ready? You going first?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's pretty low in here.
Holy cow, that's a lot of bats.
I'll share my findings with Marita Davison. She's a biologist specializing in ecology and evolution, and Costa Grammatis, an engineer who's designed everything from bionic eyes to space satellites. That's our team. Now let's do some science.
Hey guys, welcome to Techno. I'm Phil Torres, joined by Costa Grammatis and Marita Davison. Now you guys know I spend a lot of my time in the jungles. I do my research in the tropics, and usually I'm looking at things like spiders or butterflies, but this time I went down to Costa Rica to look at something different. Now, we all know there are a lot of scientific issues out there, and protecting our rainforest is certainly one of them, but maybe it's not quite high enough on the list, because we're realizing now that rainforests are doing incredible services for us in society.
And they're doing them for free, completely for free. We don't usually think about ecosystems like rainforests providing fundamental services for humans, but they do.
Yeah, and as someone who lives in New York and has visited Costa Rica, it takes so much to keep New York running. You know, so many systems. The rainforest is so much more complicated and so much more complex.
You know, and what's amazing is those services that you see in the rainforest, they don't just stop there. They're actually affecting us here in Los Angeles, and that's something that scientists are just now beginning to realize. So let's take a look.
If you listen closely, you can hear the lyrics, the poetry of the rainforest. Among its troubadours is this guy.
Literally, you see postcards with this thing.
Here's looking at you, kid. Check out these farmhands, working dusk till dawn to cultivate their garden. Stunning beauty, unparalleled biodiversity, the magic that is the rainforest. I traveled to Costa Rica to check out the health of these ecosystems. These tall, dense jungles are known for warm climates, lots of rain, and sheltering more than half of the world's plant and animal species. Although rainforests comprise a small percentage of the Earth, they do big things. In human terms, they're a critical component to how we function.
I love to think of the Amazon, the rainforest, as the lungs of the planet.
They're more like the heart of the biosphere.
Our tale of the rainforest brings us to, of all places, here, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, where scientists use techniques ranging from boots on the ground to satellites in the sky, all to understand our living, breathing, green Earth.
A recent study by research scientists Dave Schimmel and Josh Fisher reveals tropical rainforests may be man's best friend.
What our study shows is that the tropics really dominate the metabolism of our planet. They dominate the removal of fossil fuel, CO2, from the atmosphere. They're really cleaning up the planet.
Their research employed satellite mapping, forestry data, and good old-fashioned jungle gumshoeing. Trees like these are natural consumers of carbon dioxide, one of the greenhouse gases that contributes to global warming. Their research suggests tropical rainforests may be absorbing far more CO2 than previously reported.
If forests were not taking up carbon, then the simple answer is there'd be 25% more carbon in the atmosphere than there actually is, and the rate of warming would be approximately 25% faster. They're helping to regulate our climate.
Despite an overall decline in the destruction of rainforests over the past decade, it's still a story of paradise lost. Farming, construction, pollution, and drought. Just to name some of the threats to these incredibly complex ecosystems. Understanding and documenting the life in these forests is like taking their pulse.
So we just got into the bat cave, and it is absolutely amazing. Length of those antennae are incredibly long, which tells you that this thing is specifically adapted to living in the dark.
And what do we have inside? We got an insect soup. Wow, some of these are amazing. Look at that. A mosquito in there. That's the best looking mosquito I've ever seen. Wow.
Like his NASA colleagues, JPL senior scientist Sasan Sachi spends most of his time in and around global forests.
There used to be a term in 70s and 80s. It was called hamburger effect. That means all these forests being deforested for grazing land for animals. Now is actually the soybean effect.
He says we need to study the past in order to clearly see the future.
We are actually reducing the biodiversity of the world a lot.
But the trees appear to be fighting back, and a global movement is underway to offer financial incentives to not degrade these rainforests. Some places in the world are getting the message.
Well, Costa Rica is kind of a good example. They're kind of one of the green countries in the world.
While rainforests around the world continue to be diminished, there is a unique bright spot in Costa Rica. The Bihagual Ecological Reserve is a 720-acre rainforest that once was partly devastated by pasture use.
So this is all that you guys planted?
Today, through some pretty impressive environmental efforts, it's a shining example of reforestation and renewal of biodiversity. Biologist Paul Foster is the founder of Bihagual.
Most of the trees that we're looking at over here, we planted 12 years ago.
Originally, this was pasture.
Yeah, this is pasture 14 years ago.
It looks like this.
Coming back and regenerating.
I like your garden. It looks very nice.
Thank you.
As an entomologist, the Bihagual Reserve gave me the incredible opportunity to search for new species and to check out how the local wildlife is doing.
When the sun goes down, a lot of creatures come out, and the rainforest really comes alive at night. And that's why we're gonna be walking every trail, stream, or swamp we come across to see what's out there. So let's get started, see what we can find. This is one of the iconic animals of Costa Rica. Literally, you see postcards with this thing. Take a look. That is a postcard. Wow, that's incredible. So right now, one of the things that we're looking for are glass frogs, and they're these magnificent bright green frogs, and the bottom is actually see-through, which is why they're called glass frogs. So this is it. These are the glass frogs. What are we looking at?
He's guarding this clutch of eggs. The other thing that he does is if it gets too dry, if it doesn't rain for a couple days, he'll urinate or water the egg masses so that they don't dry out.
Well, that's a pretty caring father for you.
Indicator species like glass frogs are sensitive to pollution and disturbance and help us understand the state of the forest.
Got him.
Documenting their presence or absence serves as a timestamp, letting us know what's here today so we can compare that to how man has affected this forest in years to come.
Bye, little guy.
The next day, the search for species continues in the most mysterious of places.
So right now, Paul is taking me to a cave in the middle of the rainforest, and we heard there might be vampire bats in there. That is it. Oh, I can hear the bats.
There she is.
You're up.
All right.
Ready?
You going first?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's pretty low in here.
Bats mostly get a bad rap, but in real life, they're an important part of our ecosystem. Khalil Razak at the University of California, Riverside studies these winged mammals.
A lot of bats are insectivores. They eat a whole bunch of bugs around us. A lot of bats are nectivores. They drink nectar. They eat pollen. We probably will have to use much more pesticides, if not for bats hunting bugs.
I never worried about being attacked by a bat, but the thought of entering this cave was still a bit daunting. I keep telling myself, it's all for science.
So we just got into the Bat Cave, and it is absolutely amazing. I'm drenched, already covered in mud, but there are probably about 50 to 100 bats. Oh, it's a little muddy in there, but we saw some good stuff. There's a stream down there. Let's maybe clean up a bit.
Back in the rainforest, a critical part to understanding its condition is knowing what's living in there. Take a close look at this butterfly, for example.
The advantage of coming out at night is you can find butterflies sleeping. So I'm gonna wake it up a little bit so I can show you guys. And to us it looks like an owl, but to a predator, when you see it on the side, it actually looks something more like a lizard or a snake's head. So the idea is that when this butterfly is resting, something that tries to eat it will tag the back end, trying to get the neck of that lizard. And you could tell, looking at these parts in here, that it's a male, and they smell really distinctly. They smell kind of like burnt ketchup, which is kind of weird.
With all the data collected over days in the field, it's time to hit the books to identify and document what we found.
And here you can actually see the color of the bones.
Ah, yes.
The green bones.
Yep, there it
so
is.
that tells us, wow, some frogs have green bones. Who would have known? What does it mean to you every time you can add a new species to your species list?
It's a process of discovery, and it's a process of linking all of the organisms that live here together and learning more about their connections and interactions with each other.
Studying and documenting life in the rainforest is so extremely important for science. It is strenuous work and the conditions at times hazardous, but often the rewards are phenomenal.
This is Costa Rica. Not too bad.
Phil, when you discover a new species for that reserve, what's the process?
So basically, it's really important just to document it and say, this species was found here and when, so that we know exactly the condition of the rainforest at this time. This is a relatively new reserve. There's others nearby. This one in Costa Rica, La Selva, is a very well-known one that have been documenting species for decades, and using that data set, they're already seeing the effects of global warming.
Yeah, if you look at species through the optics of climate change, you know, the idea that species have their quote-unquote natural ranges, but now that climate is changing, temperatures are warming, say, that's going to affect where these species occur, where they live, where they go. And in a place like where you were, in Costa Rica, where there's a lot of mountain ecosystems, slowly those species are moving up the mountain. But then what happens when you reach the top of the mountain?
And you see that in the complex ecosystems of the rainforest, but you also see that right here in the U.S. There's definitely some species that are being affected in the Rocky Mountains, I know, some butterflies are having to move further and further up. Now, coming up next, we are going to meet a scientist who is recycling pollution into works of art.
It may not look like it, but this is the first step in making paint, artist paint, and not the ready-made kind from a tube, but the kind professional artists whip up on their own with a little pigment and linseed oil and muscle.
How did you first get the idea of making paint?
Well, anyone who's worked in this area comes home with orange-colored clothes.
The area? The lush coal country of southeast Ohio, where millions of gallons of iron-tainted water from hundreds of abandoned mines ripple through its streams and creeks, like here in the once prosperous mining town of Corning.
We're in the Sunday Creek watershed right now. It's about 130 square miles.
The watershed's watchdog, Michelle Shively, who monitors the acidic coal mine runoff that began gushing out back in 1968.
It's still discharging at anywhere from 800 to 1,000 gallons per minute. We actually end up with something called acid mine drainage, and it's filled with metals, so a really high concentration of iron, aluminum, sometimes even manganese.
Where some people saw toxic runoff, Guy Riefler, a civil engineering professor from Ohio University, saw pigment. Pigment for paint. Homegrown in Ohio and not imported from overseas factories.
It's a huge industry. We go through about 1 million metric tons a year in the United States. A lot of that is imported from China, and we're hoping with this process we can displace some of that. So careful getting in here. This is pretty slippery.
You got it.
I always lose a graduate student or two.
Oh yeah, that's some cold water. Wow, yeah, you can really see where the orange is settled on the bottom. It's amazing, when you look along the edge, it looks like really healthy habitat, but then you look in the water, what happens?
There should be lots of great fish here, all kinds of insects, but those have all been killed because of the habitat.
Nothing in here.
Yeah.
So is this the entrance?
That's it. Yeah, so right here, 6 square miles of underground mine empties out right in this single spot.
Oh, wow.
So
this is where they drilled that hole, what, 50, 60 years ago?
That's right.
And water's still pouring out. Let's collect some water. Collect some toxic water. So I know there's a lot of bad stuff in this water, but being in it now, is it like toxic to us?
Well, that's one of the reasons I think it hasn't been cleaned up yet, is because human exposure is not really a risk. It's low pH, but it's no worse than lemon juice. There's a lot of iron in it, but iron is really non-toxic to humans at this level.
So it's acidic, it's full of iron, but my skin's not gonna fall off?
I hope not.
All right, we got our 20 gallons of future paint.
All right, let's see if we can get out without falling in.
So out of these 20 gallons, how much paint are you gonna get?
So we'll get about 40 grams, which is a pretty small amount. But we're just making it for testing purposes right now.
I assume when you scale it up, you won't have people just collecting jugs.
The long-term solution here is to build a treatment plant on site right here. So it'll be like a small water treatment plant, and it will treat all the water and continuously produce pigment. And the sales from the pigment will pay for operating the plant.
Tough work being a scientist. In goes the dirty water, out comes the pigment. All right, so this is where the magic happens.
This is it. That's right. This is where we turn the AMD into pigment. All right, so the water is going to go in, and we're going to precipitate out the iron. And that happens naturally in the stream, but we want to do it in a very controlled manner in the lab so we get the right kind of color.
When you say precipitate out, that's basically taking the iron from being in the water to being a solid that you can see.
Exactly. To accelerate the reaction, we heat it up. Phil, could you turn that on over there? Next, I'm going to add a little seed. So this is some pigment that we made earlier.
It's going to basically help the other iron become more like that.
Exactly. I don't know if you've ever made rock candy from sugar water.
Sure
you always
have.
start with a crystal of sugar, right?
So it's basically you put in a little bit of the blueprint for all the other molecules to fall into.
Exactly.
Ooh, that looks nice.
Then air is bubbled in, oxidizing, literally rusting, and dissolving the iron. Next, the acid in the water is neutralized.
So what are you adding right now?
Sodium hydroxide. And I'm just going to add enough to raise the pH up to 7.5.
So I just saw it turn blue.
But only briefly. As the reaction continues, the oxidized iron turns into an orange that painters call goethite. Then it takes about 5 days for the goethite to separate from the water.
This is some after it has settled. And you can see down on the bottom there is some nice yellow.
So this down here, that's the goethite.
Once it dries, you've got pigment.
And how much can you sell this for?
It's about 50 cents a pound, which doesn't sound like much, but from the single site that we're working at, we can generate over 2,000 pounds of dry goethite a day. So that water is good to go back into the stream and be good for the aquatic life.
Time to take our pigment across campus. I'm now bringing the pigment we made in Guy Riefler's lab to the art studio of John Sabra, where we're going to be turning the toxins from Sunday Creek into art. Hey, John.
Hey, Phil. Good to meet you.
Thanks for having me here. So I brought you the finest dried sludge in Ohio, and I understand you have a use for it.
I do, and we do make a fine sludge in Ohio, I'll tell you that much. We make paints out of it, and it's actually the same kind of paint that's been used for centuries, and it's a brutally simple process. So this is a glass molar. You can feel the weight of that if you want to. Big piece of glass, and essentially what we're gonna do, very, very simple. We take a pile of this sludgy pigment. Then we take this, which is an alkali refined linseed oil. We're gonna make a little bit of a ring around it, like this. So start working from the center out. It's gonna feel like it's too hard, but you gotta put some muscle into it. There you go. Put some pressure into it. Work it. Work it harder. Nicely done, Phil.
So how does this stack up to something you'd buy at a store?
Pretty much, you wouldn't know this difference.
What was it like the first time you painted with this pigment?
Yeah, it was a disaster. Yeah, it all broke up. The binder wasn't right. The crystals were too big, so it kind of ended up being a nice dirt pile. In chunks here, chunks there. I couldn't control it all. That's a good lesson. You have to respond to that, just like a scientist.
John's fine eye for color helped refine the pigment making process and inspired a series of paintings using the acid mine drainage pigment. Called the chroma paintings, they're priced at several $1,000s each, but priceless in the message they send. So you have an unusual way of painting. It's quite organic, and as you showed me, it's quite uncontrolled. How would you describe it?
But I think it's controlled chaos. And I'm gonna push these pigments where it wants them. And at the point you're done with that, nature takes over and you have no control.
How do you find art and science combine?
The scientists and artists, they share two things. We share curiosity and failure. Scientists and artists are endlessly curious, and we fail most of the time. And that drives us forward. That sense of curiosity and the willing to get up from those failures, that leads us to our roles. And I think it's critical that we function that way, that we do this for the betterment of the world.
You're talking a lot like a scientist there.
I know, and I feel like a scientist. Don't tell them that, but I feel like a scientist.
I brought you guys back a little gift from Ohio. Now, this is the actual powder that they're using to make the art. So this was once this rusty orange pollutant in that stream, and now looks like this.
It's a really beautiful color. Do they think there's going to be a market for the paint that they produce?
Absolutely, there's a market, and I think the more we can find conservation programs that actually are funding themselves, the better. It's pretty innovative.
Yeah, I thought that was the coolest part of this whole story. I mean, the idea that the funds generated from this program would then go back into restoring a wetland system, that's really cool.
So Phil, we saw you do some painting yourself. Did your personal touch add any value to the work of art?
If anything, I took away maybe a few dollars in value, but those paintings are pretty expensive, so hopefully no harm done. Be sure to check us out next time here on TechKnow as we bring you more stories from the field of science. Dive deep into these stories and go behind the scenes at aljazeera.com/techknow. Follow our expert contributors on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Google+, and more.